In 1867 Nevada, a desperate widow clutches a mysterious burlap sack, her last hope for survival, while a frightened boy begs her with tears in his eyes never to look inside. When she finally opens it, despite his terrified pleas, what she discovers will either save them both or destroy everything they have left. But which will it be? Clara Hawthorne's bare feet hit the cold wooden floor with a thud that echoed through her empty cabin like a gunshot. The sun wasn't even up yet, but sleep had left her hours ago. Outside her window, the Nevada mountains stood like giant sleeping bears against the dark sky. Her stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. 3 days, 3 whole days, since she'd eaten anything more than stale bread crusts. Her husband Henry was buried in the ground, and her money had gone with him. She pulled on her black dress, the only good one she owned. The fabric felt rough against her skin, scratchy, like the desert wind that never stopped blowing through Millfield. Her hands shook as she buttoned it up. Not from the cold, from fear. The mirror on her dresser showed a woman she barely knew, dark circles under her eyes, cheeks sunken in like a dried-up creek bed. Hair that used to shine now hung limp and dull. She looked like a ghost, but ghosts didn't need to eat. Ghosts didn't worry about paying rent. Ghosts didn't have to swallow their pride and beg for help. Clara walked to the kitchen table where a burlap sack sat waiting. Inside was the only thing of value she had left, her grandmother's silver locket. The old woman had worn it every day until she died. Passed it down to Clara's mother, who wore it until her last breath. Then Clara wore it on her wedding day, promising Henry she'd never take it off. She'd broken that promise yesterday. The locket felt heavy through the rough fabric, heavier than silver should feel. It carried the weight of 3 generations of women who'd survived when survival seemed impossible. Clara picked up the sack and held it against her chest. The metal was cold, even through Henry's old shirt that she'd wrapped around it. His shirt still smelled like him, tobacco and soap, and the cedar shavings he used to keep moths away. "I'm sorry, Henry," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm so sorry." The walk to town took 20 minutes, but it felt like 20 hours. Every step brought her closer to Peterson's general store. Every step brought her closer to admitting she was beaten. Millfield was waking up around her. Smoke rose from chimneys like gray ribbons. The sound of axes chopping wood echoed from the forest. Men headed to the mines with lunch pails and tired eyes. Women swept porches and hung laundry. Normal people doing normal things. People who weren't about to sell the last piece of their family's history just to buy bread. Clara kept her head down and walked faster. She didn't want to see the looks, the whispers, the way people stepped aside when they saw her coming. Being poor was bad enough. Being a poor widow was worse. The general store sat on Main Street like a wooden fortress. Big windows showed shelves packed with things Clara couldn't afford. Flour and sugar and coffee. Warm coats and sturdy boots. Medicine that might have saved Henry if they'd had money for it. Peterson was already behind the counter when she pushed through the door. The bell above rang out cheerful and bright, but the storekeeper's face was anything but cheerful when he saw her, Mrs. Hawthorne. His voice was flat as day-old beer. "Morning." "Good morning, Mr. Peterson." Clara's voice came out smaller than she wanted. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I was hoping we could discuss my account." Peterson's eyes narrowed. He was a big man with hands like ham hocks and a belly that strained his vest buttons. His mustache twitched when he was annoyed. It was twitching now. "Your account." He said it like the words tasted bad. "Let me see here." He pulled out a thick ledger book and flipped through pages with dramatic slowness. Clara knew he already knew exactly how much she owed. $12.37. Might as well have been 1,000. $12.37, Peterson announced, like he was reading her death sentence. Plus interest. Call it 15 even. $15. Clara's heart sank to her boots. She'd hoped the locket might be worth 10, maybe 12 if she was lucky. "I have something to trade," she said, holding up the burlap sack. Her hands were shaking again. Peterson's eyebrows went up. "What kind of something?" Before Clara could answer, A small voice piped up from behind a barrel of flour. "Don't look under the sack." Clara spun around. A boy sat crouched in the shadows, arms wrapped around his knees. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His clothes were patched and repatched, but clean. Someone cared enough to wash them. His dark hair had been combed, though it stuck up in places like he'd been running his fingers through it. "What did you say?" Clara asked. The boy's eyes were huge in his pale face. "Don't look under the sack, ma'am. Please, don't look," Peterson snorted. "That's just Billy McReynolds. Boy's been touched in the head since his daddy got sick. Talks nonsense all day long." But Clara saw something in Billy's eyes that wasn't nonsense. It was fear. Real, honest fear that made her stomach twist. "Why shouldn't I look?" she asked, kneeling down beside him. Billy glanced around like he was checking for spies. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Bad things happen when people look. My daddy had a sack too. Told Mama never to look inside. But she did. And then his voice broke. Tears started rolling down his dirty cheeks. Then what, Billy? Then everything went wrong. Men came and took our house, took our cow, took everything we had. Daddy got sicker and sicker until..." Billy wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Until he went to sleep forever." Clara felt her heart crack a little. This poor boy had lost everything too. His father was gone, just like Henry. His world had fallen apart, just like hers. "Where's your mama now?" she asked gently. Billy's face turned red. He looked down at his scuffed boots. "She works at the saloon. At night, mostly. Mrs. Henderson watches me during the day, but she don't like it much." Peterson's voice cut through their conversation like a rusty knife. "Boy's mama ain't exactly respectable these days, if you catch my meaning. Does what she has to do to keep food on the table." Clara's cheeks burned with anger. How dare Peterson judge this boy's mother? How dare anyone judge a woman doing whatever it took to survive? "That's enough," she said sharply. Peterson shrugged. "Just stating facts, ma'am. Now, about that sack. What you got in there?" Clara looked down at Billy. His eyes were pleading with her, begging her not to open it, not to look inside. But what choice did she have? The morning sun slanted through Peterson's dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. Clara stood frozen, caught between the boy's frightened eyes and Peterson's impatient stare. The burlap sack felt like it weighed 100 pounds in her arms. "Well?" Peterson drummed his thick fingers on the counter. "I ain't got all day, Mrs. Hawthorne. Other customers need tending to." Clara glanced around the empty store. What other customers? But she didn't say that out loud. Instead, she took a deep breath and set the sack on the counter. Billy scrambled to his feet. "Please, ma'am, don't do it. I'm begging you." "Billy," Clara said softly, "sometimes we don't have choices. Sometimes we have to do things that scare us." The boy's bottom lip trembled. "That's what Mama said too," right before she looked in Daddy's sack. Peterson was already reaching for the drawstring. "Let's see what we got here." "Wait." Clara's hand shot out to stop him. Something in Billy's voice made her pause. The raw terror. The way his whole body shook when he talked about his father's sack. What if he was right? What if looking really did make bad things happen? But that was crazy thinking. Superstition. The kind of foolishness that kept people poor and scared their whole lives. $15, Peterson reminded her. "That's what you owe. This little trinket better be worth at least that much. Or you're out of luck." Clara's stomach cramped with hunger. When had she last eaten a real meal? Sunday? Monday? The days blurred together when you spent them worrying about money. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her grandmother's voice. Strong and sure, even when times were hard. "Clara Rose," she used to say, "we women folk are tougher than we look. We bend, but we don't break." Maybe it was time to find out how tough she really was. "Go ahead," she told Peterson. "Open it." Billy let out a small cry and covered his eyes with his hands. Peterson's meaty fingers worked at the drawstring. The knot was tight. Clara had made sure of that. She didn't want the precious locket bouncing around loose in there. Finally, the sack opened with a soft whisper of fabric. Peterson peered inside and frowned. Instead of reaching in, he turned the whole sack upside down and shook it. Henry's old shirt tumbled out onto the counter, along with something that made a soft, metallic clink. But it wasn't just the locket. Clara stared in shock. Wrapped in the folds of Henry's shirt was a small leather pouch she'd never seen before. It was tied with string and felt heavy, much heavier than it should have been. What in tarnation? Peterson picked up the pouch and hefted it. His eyes went wide. This feels like… He untied the string with shaking hands. Golden dust poured into his palm like tiny suns. Real gold dust. More gold dust than Clara had ever seen in one place. Where did this come from? Peterson's voice was sharp with suspicion. Clara shook her head in amazement. I don't know. I've never seen it before. Billy peeked through his fingers. When he saw the gold, his mouth fell open. Is that treasure? It's gold dust, boy. Real gold. Peterson examined the leather pouch more closely. A folded paper was tied to it with string. He untied it and spread it out on the counter. Clara recognized Henry's careful handwriting immediately. Her heart started pounding as Peterson read the note out loud. My dearest Clara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found my secret. These past months, I've been working a claim up in Devil's Canyon after my regular job was done. Didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry if it came to nothing. This here gold is for you. For the hard times I could see coming but couldn't fix. It ain't a fortune, but it's enough for a new start. Don't blame yourself for nothing that happened. You gave me the best years of my life. All my love forever, Henry. Clara's legs went weak. She grabbed the counter to keep from falling. Henry had known. Somehow, he'd known that his weak heart might give out. He'd worked extra hours, back-breaking hours, all to make sure she'd be taken care of. Tears streamed down her face. Oh, Henry, my sweet Henry. Peterson weighed the gold dust in his hand. This is easily worth $50. Maybe more, if the assay office confirms the quality. $50. Enough to pay her debts and have money left over. Enough to eat real food again. Enough to keep the cabin through the winter. Billy was staring at her with wonder. You looked, he whispered. And it wasn't bad. It was good. Clara wiped her eyes and smiled at him. The first real smile she'd managed in weeks. Sometimes good things hide in scary places, Billy. Sometimes we have to be brave to find them. But even as she said it, she wondered about Billy's story. What had his mother found in his father's sack that brought such ruin to their family? Peterson was already calculating in his head. $50 for the gold dust, minus $15 for your debt. That leaves you with $35 in credit, more than enough to stock up for winter. The store door opened with a jingle, and 3 rough-looking men walked in. Clara recognized them from around town, miners who spent their wages on whiskey and poker. The biggest one, a man called Jake Briggs, had mean eyes and hands that looked like they enjoyed hitting things. Briggs spotted Billy right away. His face twisted into an ugly grin. Well, well, look what we got here. Little Billy McReynolds. He spat on the floor. Been looking for you, boy. Billy went white as fresh snow. He pressed himself against the flour barrel like he was trying to disappear into it. What do you want with Billy? Clara stepped between them without thinking. Briggs looked her up and down like she was something unpleasant he'd scraped off his boot. This ain't your concern, widow woman. Boy's got debts to pay. What debts? Clara's voice was steady, but her heart was racing. He's just a child. His daddy owed us money. Gambling debts, poker mostly. Briggs cracked his knuckles. When a man dies, his debts pass to his family. That's how it works. Peterson cleared his throat nervously. Now, Jake, the boy don't have nothing to pay with. His mama barely scrapes by as it is. Oh, I know exactly how his mama scrapes by. Briggs's laugh was ugly. But see, we got a principle to uphold here. Can't have folks thinking they can die and leave their debts behind. Sets a bad precedent. Clara felt fury rising in her chest like floodwater. These men were going to hurt a child over money his dead father owed. It was wrong. It was evil. But what could she do about it? She was just one woman, a poor widow who'd been lucky enough to find her husband's hidden gold. Billy's terrified eyes met hers across the store. In them, she saw herself, scared, alone, desperate. But she also saw something else, hope. He was looking at her like she might be able to help him, like she might be brave enough to try. The gold dust glittered on Peterson's counter like a promise, like a chance to do something good with the gift Henry had left her. How much? Clara heard herself asking. How much did Billy's father owe? Briggs's eyebrows went up. $25. With interest. $25. Almost all of her gold. Almost all of Henry's final gift to her. But what was money compared to a child's safety? What was gold compared to doing what was right? Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she stared down Jake Briggs and his two companions. The general store felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. $25. The words echoed in her head like thunder. You got that kind of money, widow? Briggs stepped closer, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Because if you don't, maybe you should mind your own business. Billy whimpered behind the flour barrel. Clara could see his small shoulders shaking. This brave little boy, who'd tried to warn her about looking in sacks, was terrified. And she was the only person standing between him and these bullies. I have the money, Clara said quietly. Peterson's mouth fell open. Mrs. Hawthorne, that's most of your gold dust. Are you sure about this? Was she sure? No, she wasn't sure about anything anymore. A week ago, she'd been a respectable married woman. Now she was a widow, making deals with dangerous men to protect a child she barely knew. But when she looked at Billy's scared face, she knew she couldn't walk away. $25, she said to Briggs. That settles Billy's father's debt completely? Briggs grinned, showing teeth stained brown from chewing tobacco. Every last penny. You pay that, and the boys, free and clear. Deal. Clara turned to Peterson. Take $25 worth of the gold dust. Peterson measured out the gold with careful precision. His hands shook slightly as he poured the precious dust into a small cloth bag. This is mighty generous of you, ma'am. Mighty generous. Briggs snatched the bag and weighed it in his palm. He bit into it, testing the gold's purity, then nodded with satisfaction. Pleasure doing business with you, widow. Come on, boys. Let's go get us some drinks. The three men left, their spurs jingling against the floorboards. The store felt bigger again once they were gone, but Clara's legs were still wobbly. Billy crept out from behind the flour barrel. His eyes were huge and filled with tears. Why did you do that? You don't even know me. Clara knelt down to his level. Up close, she could see he had his mother's nose and his father's stubborn chin. Because it was the right thing to do. Because nobody should have to pay for their parents' mistakes. But now, you don't have much money left. Clara thought about her remaining gold dust. Maybe $10 worth. Enough to pay her debts to Peterson and buy food for a few weeks. Not enough to feel secure, but enough to survive. Money isn't everything, Billy. Some things are more important. Billy threw his arms around her neck in a fierce hug. He smelled like soap and little boy, clean, but with traces of dirt that wouldn't wash off. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Clara hugged him back, surprised by how good it felt. When was the last time someone had hugged her? Really hugged her? With their whole heart? Peterson cleared his throat. Mrs. Hawthorne, about your remaining business. Yes, of course. Clara stood up and brushed off her skirts. I owe you $15. The rest of the gold should cover that and leave me with some credit for supplies. Peterson nodded and made notes in his ledger. That leaves you with about $10 in credit. What can I get for you today? Clara looked around the store with new eyes. Flour, beans, salt, pork, the basics she'd need to get through the next few weeks. But for the first time in days, the future didn't seem quite so dark. Flour, please, and beans, and maybe some of that salt pork, if it's not too dear. As Peterson gathered her supplies, Billy stayed close by her side. "Mrs. Hawthorne, could I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think my daddy was wrong about not looking in sacks?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I think your daddy was trying to protect your mama from bad news. Sometimes grown-ups think it's better not to know things that will hurt." "But Billy," she touched his shoulder gently, "sometimes the only way to solve problems is to face them head-on, even when it's scary." Billy nodded solemnly. "That's what you did. You faced the scary men." "We both did. You were brave too, telling me your story." They walked out of the store together, Clara carrying her supplies and Billy skipping alongside her. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, and for a moment, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. But as they reached the end of Main Street, Billy stopped walking. "I have to go to Mrs. Henderson's now. Mama will be getting up soon, and she likes me to be there when she does." Clara nodded. Billy's mother worked nights at the saloon, which meant she slept during the day. The boy spent his days with whoever would watch him, waiting for the few hours he could spend with his mama before she had to work again. "Billy," Clara said impulsively, "would you like to come have supper with me tonight? I'm making bean stew." Billy's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it. Around 6 o'clock, if your mama says it's all right." Billy nodded eagerly and ran off toward Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. Clara watched him go, then turned toward home. The cabin that had felt so empty this morning suddenly seemed full of possibilities. She was halfway there when she heard footsteps behind her. Fast footsteps, like someone was hurrying to catch up. "Mrs. Hawthorne! Mrs. Hawthorne! Wait!" Clara turned to see a woman in a faded blue dress running toward her. The woman was thin and pale, with light brown hair pinned back severely. Her dress was clean but worn, mended in several places. This had to be Billy's mother. The woman stopped in front of Clara, breathing hard. "I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. I'm Rose McReynolds, Billy's mother." "Mrs. McReynolds." Clara wasn't sure what to say. What did you say to a woman whose child you'd just saved from his father's debts? Rose's hands twisted together nervously. "Billy told me what you did, about paying off Jimmy's gambling debts." Her voice caught. "I don't know how to thank you. There's no need to thank me." "But there is." Rose's eyes filled with tears. "Those men, they've been threatening Billy for weeks, making him scared to go anywhere alone. I've been working extra shifts, trying to scrape together the money. But," she shook her head, "it would have taken me months to earn that much." Clara felt a stab of guilt. While she'd been worrying about her own problems, this woman had been facing something much worse: the threat of violence against her child. "I invited Billy for supper tonight," Clara said. "I hope that's all right." Rose's face crumpled with relief. "More than all right. He talks about you constantly, about how kind you were to him in Peterson's store, how you listened to his warnings about the sack. He's a good boy. Very smart." "He is." Rose wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I know what people say about me, about what I do for work. I know you probably shouldn't be seen with someone like me." Clara felt anger flare in her chest again. "Mrs. McReynolds, you're doing whatever it takes to keep your son fed and housed. That makes you a good mother in my book. Anyone who says different can mind their own business." Rose stared at her in amazement. "You really mean that?" "I really do." They stood there for a moment, two women who'd been knocked down by life but were still fighting to get back up. Clara realized she'd found something she hadn't expected: a friend. "I should let you get home," Rose said finally. "But Mrs. Hawthorne, if there's ever anything I can do to repay your kindness—" "There is one thing," Clara said. "Would you like to join Billy and me for supper? I'm making bean stew, and there's plenty for 3. Rose's eyes widened. "You'd want me at your table? After what I told you about my work?" "Mrs. McReynolds. Rose, I'd be honored to have you at my table." The beans were just starting to soften when Clara heard voices outside her cabin. Through the window, she could see Billy racing up the path, with his mother following behind at a more dignified pace. Rose carried a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. Clara opened the door before they could knock. "Right on time," Something smells wonderful. Rose held up the basket with a shy smile. Cornbread. I know it's not much, but I wanted to bring something. It's perfect. Clara welcomed them inside, surprised by how warm the cabin felt with guests in it. Billy, would you like to help me set the table? Billy nodded eagerly and began placing Clara's mismatched plates around the small wooden table. Rose looked around the cabin, taking in the neat but sparse furnishings. You have a lovely home, she said politely. Clara almost laughed. Lovely? The cabin was tiny, with furniture that had seen better days and walls that let in drafts. But Rose said it like she meant it. It's not much, but it's mine, Clara replied. For now, anyway. Rose's forehead creased with concern. For now? Clara stirred the beans, buying herself time to think. Should she tell Rose about her money troubles? About how close she'd come to losing everything? The cabin belongs to the mining company, she explained. Henry worked for them. Now that he's gone. She shrugged. They might need it for another worker's family. Billy stopped setting plates and looked up at her with worried eyes. You mean you might have to move away? I don't know yet, sweetheart. But don't worry about it tonight. Tonight is for celebrating. Celebrating what? Rose asked. Clara ladled stew into bowls, thinking about the question. What were they celebrating? The fact that Billy was safe from his father's creditors? That she'd found Henry's hidden gold? That she wasn't completely alone in the world anymore? New friendships, she said finally. They sat down to eat, and for the first time in weeks, Clara's cabin was filled with conversation and laughter. Billy told them about his day with Mrs. Henderson, mimicking the old woman's habit of talking to her cats like they were people. And then Mittens knocked over the milk pitcher, Billy said. And Mrs. Henderson said, Mittens, you're acting like you were raised by wolves. But Mittens just licked her paws like she didn't care. Rose laughed, a sound like silver bells. Mrs. Henderson means well, but she does take her cats very seriously. Too seriously, Clara agreed. I saw her in Peterson's store last week, buying special salmon for them while she ate nothing but crackers. As they ate, Clara found herself studying Rose. She was younger than Clara had expected, probably not even 25. Her hands were soft, not the rough, calloused hands of someone who did hard manual labor. Before her husband died, she'd probably lived a quiet, respectable life. Rose, Clara said carefully, may I ask what you did before Jimmy got sick? Rose's cheeks flushed pink. I was a seamstress, made dresses and shirts for ladies in town. I was quite good at it, actually. What happened to your sewing business? Rose's face fell. When Jimmy got the fever, I spent all my time taking care of him. Customers went elsewhere. By the time he died, I'd lost all my clients. And then the gambling debts came to light. She trailed off, stirring her stew without eating it. Billy reached over and patted his mother's hand. It's okay, Mama. Mrs. Hawthorne paid the bad men. They can't hurt us anymore. Rose looked at Clara with gratitude and shame mixed in her eyes. I still can't believe you did that. For strangers. You're not strangers anymore, Clara said firmly. And Rose, have you thought about starting your sewing business again? Rose shook her head. I don't have money for fabric or supplies. And even if I did, who would hire me now? Everyone knows where I work. Clara had been thinking about this all afternoon. What if someone gave you a small loan to get started? Just enough for basic supplies? Rose's eyes widened. Mrs. Hawthorne, I couldn't possibly ask you for more money. You've already done so much. You're not asking. I'm offering. Clara reached across the table and took Rose's hand. I have a little credit left at Peterson's store. Enough to get you some fabric and thread. You could start small, maybe making shirts for the miners. They always need new clothes, and they pay cash. Billy bounced in his chair with excitement. Mama, you could sew again. You love sewing. Rose was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Clara urged. Say you'll give yourself another chance. But what about my job at the saloon? Mr. Garrett expects me to work. Clara had thought about this too. What if you told him you could only work 3 nights a week instead of 6? That would give you time to build up your sewing business. Once you have enough customers, you could quit the saloon completely. Rose wiped her eyes with her napkin. Do you really think it could work? I know it could work. You're talented and hardworking. All you need is a chance. Billy grabbed his mother's other hand. Please, Mama? Please say yes? Rose looked back and forth between them, hope and fear warring in her expression. If I said yes, how would I ever repay you? By succeeding, Clara said simply, by building a good life for you and Billy. That's payment enough. Rose squeezed both their hands. Then yes, I'll try. Billy whooped with joy and jumped up to hug his mother. Clara felt tears in her own eyes watching them together. This was what Henry's gold was meant for, not just keeping her alive, but helping others build better lives. They finished supper in high spirits, making plans for Rose's new business. She would start by making simple work shirts, the kind miners wore every day. If those sold well, she could expand to other items. I know exactly where to set up, Rose said excitedly. There's a small room above the bakery that Mrs. Chen isn't using. She might rent it cheap. And I could help deliver the shirts, Billy added. I know where all the miners live. Clara smiled at their enthusiasm. For the first time since Henry's death, she felt useful, like she was part of something bigger than her own survival. But as Rose and Billy prepared to leave, Clara heard horses approaching outside, heavy hoofbeats and the jingle of spurs. Her blood ran cold. Through the window, she could see 3 riders in the fading light. Jake Briggs was in the lead, and he looked angry. Angrier than he'd been in Peterson's store. Mrs. Hawthorne? Billy had noticed her expression. What's wrong? Clara moved quickly to blow out the lamp, plunging the cabin into darkness. Rose, take Billy to the back room. Now. What's happening? Rose whispered. But she was already pulling Billy toward the bedroom. Clara peeked through the curtain. Briggs had dismounted and was walking toward her door. His 2 companions stayed on their horses, hands resting on their gun belts. This wasn't a social call. Heavy boots climbed the porch steps. A fist pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. Mrs. Hawthorne, open up! We need to talk! Clara's hand froze on the door handle as Jake Briggs's fist crashed against the wood again. Each blow sent vibrations through her entire body. In the back room, she could hear Rose whispering frantically to Billy, trying to keep him calm. I know you're in there, widow. Briggs's voice was thick with whiskey and rage. We got business to discuss. Clara's mind raced. What could they possibly want? She'd paid Billy's debt fair and square. Peterson had witnessed the whole transaction. The gold dust had been real. She'd seen Briggs test it himself. Unless her stomach dropped like a stone down a well. Unless they discovered something about Henry's secret mine. Unless they thought there was more gold where that came from. Mrs. Hawthorne, another voice called out, one of Briggs's companions. We ain't leaving till we talk to you. Clara took a shaky breath and called through the door. What do you want? Our business is finished. Briggs laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Oh no, widow. Our business is just getting started. See, we've been asking around about your late husband. Real interesting stories folks been telling. Clara's blood turned to ice water. What stories? Henry had been careful about his secret claim. He'd worked it alone, after his regular shifts, when no one would notice him gone. Open the door, or we'll open it for you, Briggs threatened. Clara knew she had no choice. These men weren't going away. And if they broke down her door, Rose and Billy would be trapped in the back room with no escape. She turned the handle and opened the door just wide enough to step outside, pulling it shut behind her. The cool night air hit her face like a slap. Briggs stood on her porch, swaying slightly. His eyes were bloodshot and mean. Behind him, his 2 friends sat on their horses like vultures, waiting for something to die. That's better, Briggs said with a grin that showed his brown teeth. Now we can have a proper conversation. Say what you came to say and get off my property. Clara's voice was steadier than she felt. Briggs stepped closer, and Clara smelled the whiskey on his breath, mixed with sweat and tobacco. Been talking to some of the boys from the mines. They remember your husband working late shifts. Real late. Staying behind after everyone else went home. Clara kept her face blank, but inside she was screaming. Someone had noticed. Someone had seen Henry going to his secret claim. So? She managed to say. So, Briggs continued. We're thinking maybe that gold dust you used to pay the boy's debt wasn't all your husband left behind. Maybe there's a whole lot more where that came from. One of the mounted men leaned forward in his saddle. Could be he found himself a real nice claim up in those hills. Could be he was keeping it secret, so he wouldn't have to share. The third man spat into the dirt. That would be stealing from the company, wouldn't it, Jake? Taking gold that rightfully belongs to everyone? Clara's hands clenched into fists. My husband never stole anything in his life. He was an honest man who worked hard for everything he earned. Maybe, Briggs said, maybe not. Point is, if there's more gold up there, we deserve our share. We've been busting our backs in those mines for years while your husband was getting rich on the side. I don't know what you're talking about, Clara lied. The gold dust I had was all he left me. Just what was in that pouch. Briggs grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. Don't lie to me, woman. We know he had a secret claim. Question is, are you gonna tell us where it is? Or do we have to persuade you? Clara tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Let go of me. Not until you start talking. Briggs's face was inches from hers now. Where's the claim, widow? Where's the rest of the gold? Behind the cabin door, Clara heard a soft creak. Rose was listening, probably terrified for Billy's safety. Clara had to end this before it got worse. There is no claim, she said firmly. You're wasting your time. Briggs backhanded her across the face with his free hand. The blow sent stars dancing across her vision and split her lip. Blood ran down her chin, metallic and warm. Wrong answer, Briggs snarled. Try again. Clara touched her split lip and looked at the blood on her fingers. She'd never been hit by a man before. Henry wouldn't have hurt a fly, let alone raised a hand to her. The shock of it made her dizzy, but it also made her angry. You can hit me all you want, she said through gritted teeth. I can't tell you about something that doesn't exist. Briggs raised his hand again, but one of his friends called out a warning. Jake, someone's coming. They all turned to see a lantern bobbing up the path toward the cabin. As it got closer, Clara could make out the silhouette of a large man walking with purpose. Who's that? Briggs squinted into the darkness. The man stepped into the circle of light from Clara's porch. It was Big Tom Chen, the baker whose wife ran the bakery in town. Tom was 6 feet tall and built like a tree trunk from years of kneading bread and hauling flour sacks. His face was usually gentle and kind, but tonight it looked thunderous. Evening, Mrs. Hawthorne, Tom said politely, but his eyes never left Briggs. Heard some commotion up here. Thought I'd check and make sure everything was all right. Briggs released Clara's arm and stepped back. Even drunk, he wasn't stupid enough to tangle with Big Tom Chen. Just having a friendly conversation, Tom. Nothing that concerns you. Tom's eyes took in Clara's split lip and the way she was holding her arm where Briggs had grabbed her. Doesn't look very friendly to me. He set his lantern down and crossed his arms over his chest. The gesture made his muscles bulge under his shirt sleeves. Mrs. Hawthorne, are these men bothering you? Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Tom took a step forward. Then I think it's time they left. Briggs looked back at his mounted friends, clearly calculating the odds. 3 against 1 might have been good odds, but Tom Chen was worth at least 2 ordinary men in a fight, and they'd been drinking while he was stone sober. This ain't over, widow, Briggs said, backing toward his horse. We know you're lying about that gold, and we're gonna prove it. He swung up into his saddle with less grace than usual, nearly falling off the other side. His friends had to grab him to steady him. Next time we won't be so polite, one of them called as they rode away into the darkness. Tom waited until the sound of hoofbeats faded before turning to Clara. You hurt bad? Clara touched her lip again. It was still bleeding, but not severely. I'll live. Tom, thank you. If you hadn't come. My wife saw them riding up here with purpose. She sent me to check. Tom picked up his lantern. These men been bothering you before? Clara hesitated. Should she tell him about Billy's debt? About the gold dust and Henry's secret claim? Tom was a good man, but he was also part of the town. Word would spread. Before she could decide, the cabin door opened, and Rose emerged with Billy close behind her. Mrs. Hawthorne? Rose's voice was shaky. We heard shouting. Are you hurt? Tom's eyebrows went up when he saw Rose. Everyone in town knew Rose McReynolds and what she did for work. Seeing her come out of Clara's cabin would cause talk, but Tom just nodded politely. Evening, Mrs. McReynolds. Billy. Billy ran to Clara and threw his arms around her waist. Those were the bad men, weren't they? The ones who wanted to hurt me? They're gone now, sweetheart. Clara smoothed his hair. They can't hurt any of us. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Briggs and his friends would be back. They were convinced Henry had left behind a fortune in gold, and they wouldn't stop until they found it, or until they decided she really didn't know where it was. Tom seemed to read her thoughts. Mrs. Hawthorne, maybe you and your friends here should come stay at the bakery tonight. My wife would be happy to put you up. Clara was tempted. The bakery was in the middle of town, with neighbors close by. Briggs wouldn't dare try anything there, but running away felt like admitting defeat. This was her home, her sanctuary. She wouldn't let bullies drive her out of it. Thank you, Tom. But we'll be fine here, she said. Tom frowned. You sure about that? Those men looked serious about whatever they wanted. Clara looked down at Billy's worried face, then at Rose's frightened eyes. Maybe staying wasn't just about her pride. Maybe she was putting them all in danger. Actually, she said, maybe staying at the bakery would be a good idea. Just for tonight. The Chen family's bakery sat on Main Street like a warm, yeasty-scented fortress. Tom led Clara, Rose, and Billy through the back entrance, past racks of cooling bread, and into the cozy living quarters above the shop. Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with steel-gray hair and kind eyes, welcomed them without question. Any friend of Tom's is welcome here, she said, bustling around to prepare tea and leftover sweet rolls. Billy, you look hungry. When did you last eat a proper dessert? Billy's eyes went wide at the sight of the cinnamon rolls. I don't remember, ma'am. Mrs. Chen clucked her tongue and placed a huge roll in front of him. No child should have to say that. Eat up. As Billy devoured the sweet roll with sticky fingers, Clara found herself studying the Chen's kitchen. It was warm and lived in, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs drying in bundles. This was what a real home looked like, full of love and the smell of good food. Rose sat quietly in the corner, clearly uncomfortable. She kept glancing toward the door like she expected someone to burst in and demand to know why a saloon girl was sitting at a respectable family's table. Tom noticed her discomfort. Mrs. McReynolds, my wife tells me you used to be quite the seamstress before your troubles. She's been looking for someone to help with alterations. Mrs. Chen nodded enthusiastically. The miners are always bringing me pants that are too long or shirts that are too wide. I can cook and bake, but sewing? My fingers are too clumsy. Rose's face brightened slightly. I do alterations. Or I used to. Would you be interested in some work? I could pay you 50 cents for each piece you fix. 50 cents per alteration. Clara did quick math in her head. If Rose did just 4 or 5 pieces a week, that would be enough to start cutting back her hours at the saloon. Yes, Rose stammered. Yes, I'd very much like that. Mrs. Chen beamed. Wonderful. Tom, go get that basket of mending from the bedroom. We'll give Mrs. McReynolds something to start on right away. While Tom fetched the mending, Billy finished his cinnamon roll and curled up on the kitchen sofa. The excitement of the evening was catching up with him, and his eyelids were growing heavy. Clara watched him drift off to sleep, his face peaceful for the first time since she'd met him. This little boy had been carrying such heavy burdens, fear of his father's creditors, worry about his mother's reputation, uncertainty about where their next meal would come from. At least some of those burdens were lifted now. Mrs. Chen appeared at Clara's elbow with a warm washcloth. "For your lip, dear. It's still bleeding a little." Clara had almost forgotten about Briggs hitting her. She pressed the cloth to her split lip, wincing at the sting. "Those men who came to your cabin," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Tom says they were asking about gold?" Clara nodded reluctantly. "They think my husband left behind more than he did. They won't believe me when I tell them there's nothing to find." Mrs. Chen sat down beside her. "My husband and I came here from China 20 years ago, with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a dream of opening a bakery. We know what it's like to have people assume things about you, to face suspicion and threats." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes when people want something badly enough, the truth doesn't matter to them. They'll keep pushing until they get what they want, or until someone stops them. "How do you stop men like Briggs?" Clara asked. "I'm just one woman." "You're not alone," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "You have friends now, people who care about what happens to you." Tom returned with the basket of mending and set it on the table. Rose's eyes lit up as she examined the clothes, torn seams, missing buttons, hems that needed shortening, simple work that she could easily handle. "I could have these done by tomorrow evening," she said. "No rush," Mrs. Chen assured her. "But if you'd like to work on them here, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Clara looked around the warm kitchen at these people who barely knew her, but were opening their home and their hearts. When had she last felt so cared for? When had strangers become friends so quickly? "Mrs. Chen," she said impulsively, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear. When you and Tom first came to Millfield, how did you convince people to trust you? How did you build your business when everyone saw you as outsiders?" Mrs. Chen smiled. "One loaf of bread at a time. We made the best bread we could and sold it for a fair price. We treated every customer with respect, even the ones who called us names or tried to cheat us. Eventually, people realized that good bread is good bread, no matter who bakes it." She gestured toward Rose, who was already threading a needle to start on the mending. "The same thing will work for Mrs. McReynolds. Good sewing is good sewing. People need their clothes fixed, and she needs honest work. It's a fair trade." Rose looked up from her needle. "But what about my reputation? What I do at the saloon? What you do to survive doesn't define who you are," Mrs. started. Chen said gently, "What defines you is how you treat other people, how you raise your son, whether you keep your word when you give it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. This wise woman had just said what Clara had been thinking, but couldn't put into words. Rose wasn't defined by her job at the saloon any more than Clara was defined by being a poor widow. They were both just women doing whatever it took to survive. Tom poured himself a cup of tea and sat down at the table. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I've been thinking about those men who threatened you. Briggs and his friends aren't going to give up easy. They really believe your husband had a secret gold claim?" Clara hesitated. She trusted the Chens, but Henry's secret had been his alone to keep. Was it right to share it now? But looking at Billy sleeping peacefully on the sofa, and Rose bent over her sewing, and the kind faces of Tom and his wife, Clara realized she was tired of carrying the secret alone. "He did have a claim," she said quietly, "up in Devil's Canyon. He worked it after his regular shifts when no one would see him." Tom's eyebrows went up. "Devil's Canyon? That's rough country. Dangerous to work alone." Henry was careful. "He left me a note saying he'd been working it for months. The gold dust I used to pay Billy's debt, that was everything Henry had managed to collect." "Everything?" Mrs. Chen asked. Clara nodded. "The note said it wasn't a fortune, just enough for a new start." "Which it was. Exactly enough to pay my debts and have a little left over." Tom stroked his chin thoughtfully. "But Briggs and his friends don't know that. They're probably thinking, your husband struck it rich up there. What should I do?" Clara asked. "They won't believe me when I tell them there's no more gold." "Maybe," Tom said slowly. "You need to show them instead of telling them. Rose looked up from her sewing. What do you mean? Tom leaned forward. What if we took them to Henry's claim? Let them see for themselves that it's played out? Sometimes, seeing is the only thing that convinces stubborn men. Clara's stomach clenched at the thought. Going back to Devil's Canyon meant facing the place where Henry had worked himself to death, trying to provide for her. It meant sharing his final secret with the very men who'd threatened her. But it might also be the only way to end this peacefully. It's dangerous up there, she said. The canyon walls are steep, and there are loose rocks everywhere. One wrong step. I know the canyon, Tom said. Been up there hunting deer. It's treacherous, but not impossible if you know what you're doing. Mrs. Chen placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder. You don't have to decide tonight, dear. Sleep on it. In the morning, things might look clearer. Clara nodded gratefully. The events of the day had left her exhausted. Finding Henry's gold, saving Billy from his father's debts, meeting Rose, being threatened by Briggs. Her head was spinning with all of it. But as she settled into the comfortable bed Mrs. Chen had prepared for her, with Rose and Billy safe in the next room, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. Whatever tomorrow brought, at least tonight they were all safe and warm and cared for. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Dawn was breaking over Millfield when Clara woke to the sound of horses thundering down Main Street. She bolted upright in the unfamiliar bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the bakery's upstairs window, she could see Jake Briggs and his men riding hard toward the edge of town. But they weren't alone. Behind them rode Sheriff Coleman and 3 deputies, their badges glinting in the early morning sun. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown. Clara, dear, you need to see this. Tom's downstairs talking to the sheriff. Clara threw on her dress and hurried down to the bakery's main floor. Tom stood by the front window with Sheriff Coleman, both men watching the dust cloud disappear into the hills. What's happening? Clara asked. Sheriff Coleman turned to face her. He was a lean man with gray whiskers and tired eyes that had seen too much trouble. Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm afraid there's been some developments regarding those men who threatened you last night. Clara's stomach dropped. What kind of developments? Someone broke into Peterson's general store around midnight, took all the cash from the register, and ransacked the place looking for something. Peterson says nothing else was missing, just the money and his ledger books. Tom's face was grim. Tell her the rest, Sheriff. Coleman sighed. Whoever did it also broke into the assay office, stole the scales and testing equipment. And he paused, clearly reluctant to continue. And they took all the records of recent gold transactions, including yours from yesterday. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. They're trying to figure out how much gold Henry really had. That's what I'm thinking. Mrs. Hawthorne, is there anything you haven't told me about your husband's mining activities? Before Clara could answer, Rose came downstairs, carrying a sleepy Billy. The boy rubbed his eyes and looked around in confusion. Why is everyone up so early? He asked. Clara knelt down to his level. There's been some trouble in town, sweetheart, but you're safe here with us. Sheriff Coleman studied Rose with curiosity. It wasn't every day he found the town's most notorious widow sharing breakfast with a saloon girl and a Chinese baker's family. Mrs. McReynolds, he said politely, didn't expect to see you here. Rose's cheeks flushed red. Mrs. Hawthorne was kind enough to invite Billy and me for supper last night. When those men came to threaten her, the Chens offered us shelter. Coleman's expression softened slightly. Well, that was neighborly of them. He turned back to Clara. Mrs. Hawthorne, I need to ask you directly. Did your husband have a secret mining claim? Clara looked around at the faces of her friends. Tom nodded encouragingly. Mrs. Chen gave her a supportive smile. Rose squeezed her hand gently. Yes, Clara said quietly. He did. Up in Devil's Canyon. But Sheriff, there's no more gold there. What I had yesterday was everything Henry collected over months of work. Coleman stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. Problem is, Briggs and his boys don't believe that. They think you're sitting on a fortune and just playing dumb. So what do we do? Tom asked. We could take them up there, Clara said, repeating Tom's suggestion from the night before. Show them the claim is empty. Coleman shook his head. Too dangerous. Devil's Canyon is treacherous enough without taking along a bunch of drunk, greedy men with guns. Billy tugged on Clara's skirt. Mrs. Hawthorne, what if we showed them something else? Everyone looked down at the boy. His young face was serious, like he was working through a difficult problem. What do you mean, sweetheart? Billy bit his lip, thinking hard. Well, my daddy had a sack that Mama wasn't supposed to look in, right? And when she finally looked, it had papers about his gambling debts. Clara nodded. That's right. But you had a sack too. And when you looked in it, there was gold and a nice letter from your husband. Rose smiled at her son's logic. Yes, Billy. What's your point? Billy looked up at Sheriff Coleman. What if we made a fake sack for the bad men? Something that would make them stop wanting Mrs. Hawthorne's gold? The adults exchanged glances. Out of the mouths of babes. That's actually not a terrible idea, Tom said slowly. But what would we put in it? Mrs. Chen, who had been listening quietly, suddenly smiled. I know exactly what we should put in it. She disappeared into the back of the bakery and returned with a flour-dusted canvas bag. From it, she pulled a folded piece of paper covered in official-looking stamps and seals. This is our original deed to the bakery, she explained. It's written in Chinese and English, with government stamps from California. Very impressive looking. She handed it to Clara. What if we created fake mining documents? Papers that show your husband's claim was already registered to someone else, or that it was declared empty by the territorial government. Sheriff Coleman examined the deed. This could work. The stamps and seals look official enough to fool drunken miners. But we'd need someone who can write in an official style. I can do that, Rose said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. Before I married Jimmy, I worked as a clerk in a lawyer's office back in Sacramento. I copied legal documents all day long. I know how they should look and sound. Tom grinned. So, we create fake papers showing that Henry's claim is worthless or belongs to someone else. Then we accidentally let Briggs find them. But how do we get him to find them without being obvious about it? Clara asked. Billy piped up again. What if you dropped the sack? Like, by accident. Somewhere the bad men would see it but think you didn't mean for them to? Mrs. Chen clapped her hands together. This boy is brilliant. We'll stage it so Clara accidentally drops the sack somewhere public, where Briggs and his friends will find it. Clara felt a flutter of hope in her chest. It was a risky plan, but it might work. And it was certainly better than hiding in fear for the rest of her life. Sheriff, she said, would this be legal? Creating fake documents? Coleman considered the question carefully. Normally, I'd say no. But you're not using them to steal or cheat anyone. You're protecting yourself from men who broke into 2 businesses and threatened violence. I think we can bend the rules a little. Rose was already getting excited about the project. I'll need good paper, official-looking pens, and maybe some wax for seals. Tom, do you think Peterson would sell me supplies even though his store was robbed? Peterson's a good man, Tom assured her. Once we explain what we're doing, he'll help any way he can. Over the next hour, they worked out the details of their plan. Rose would create fake territorial documents, declaring Henry's claim to be worthless, played out, and abandoned. They would age the papers with tea stains and crumple them to look worn. Clara would then take the fake documents in a burlap sack to Peterson's store, where she would accidentally drop them while Briggs and his friends were watching. The men would wait for her to leave, then examine the papers and hopefully conclude that there was no more gold to be found. What if they don't believe the fake papers? Clara asked. Sheriff Coleman adjusted his gun belt. Then we'll deal with them the traditional way. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Billy had been listening to the adult conversation with wide eyes. Now he tugged on his mother's skirt. Mama, are we helping Mrs. Hawthorne trick the bad men? Rose knelt down to his level. We're helping her protect herself, sweetheart. Sometimes, when bullies won't listen to the truth, you have to be creative. Like when Johnny Miller kept taking my lunch money, And I told him my daddy was a sheriff. Rose's eyes twinkled. Exactly like that. Sometimes a little fib prevents a bigger hurt. Mrs. Chen had been gathering supplies. TP, paper, ink, sealing wax, and official-looking stamps she used for her bakery orders. Rose, dear, you can work at our kitchen table. The light is good there, and no one will disturb you. As Rose settled down to begin her forgery work, Clara found herself marveling at how quickly her life had changed. 3 days ago, she'd been a desperate widow with no friends and no hope. Now she was surrounded by people willing to break the law to protect her. Mrs. Chen, she said impulsively, why are you helping me? You barely know me. The older woman smiled and patted Clara's cheek. Child, when Tom and I came to this town 20 years ago, we were strangers too. Foreigners who didn't speak the language well and didn't understand the customs. Do you know who helped us get started? Clara shook her head. Your husband, Henry. He was the first person to buy bread from our bakery. He told all his friends at the mine that we made the best bread in Nevada. He gave us our start in this town. Clara felt tears welling up in her eyes. Even after death, Henry was still taking care of her. Now, Mrs. Chen continued briskly, let's get these documents finished. We have some bad men to fool. 3 hours later, Rose held up the finished documents with pride. The papers looked authentically aged and official, complete with territorial seals and stamps that declared Henry Hawthorne's mining claim in Devil's Canyon to be exhausted of valuable minerals and hereby abandoned by order of the Nevada Territorial Mining Commission. These are perfect, Sheriff Coleman said, examining Rose's handiwork. I've seen real territorial documents, and these would fool anyone who wasn't a lawyer. Clara carefully placed the fake papers in a worn burlap sack, making sure they were visible enough to be discovered but not so obvious as to arouse suspicion. Her hands shook slightly as she tied the drawstring. You don't have to do this, Tom said gently. We could find another way. But Clara shook her head. No, this is the right plan, and it needs to come from me. Briggs won't believe papers he finds anywhere else. Billy tugged on her skirt. Mrs. Hawthorne, what if the bad men try to hurt you again? Clara knelt down and took his small hands in hers. They won't, sweetheart. Sheriff Coleman and Tom will be watching from across the street. And besides, once they see these papers, they'll realize there's no point in bothering me anymore. Rose finished packing up her sewing supplies. The morning's work on the Chen's mending basket had earned her $2, more money than she usually made in a week at the saloon. Her face glowed with the satisfaction of honest work. When this is all over, she said to Clara, I want you to know that you've changed my life. Both our lives. She glanced at Billy, who was helping Mrs. Chen arrange fresh bread in the display case. You've changed mine too, Clara replied. I forgot what it felt like to have friends, to be part of something bigger than my own problems. Sheriff Coleman checked his pocket watch. It's almost noon. Briggs and his boys usually start drinking around this time. If we're gonna do this, now's the moment. Clara stood up and smoothed her black dress. In her hand, the burlap sack felt heavier than it should have. Not because of what was in it, but because of what it represented. The end of Henry's secret. The end of her troubles with Briggs. Hopefully, the beginning of a new life. I'm ready, she said. The walk to Peterson's general store felt like walking to her own execution. Tom and Sheriff Coleman followed at a distance, trying to look casual. Rose and Billy watched from the bakery window, Mrs. Chen's protective arm around both of them. Peterson's store showed signs of the break-in from the night before. The front window had a crack running down one side, and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. But Peterson himself was behind the counter, determined to conduct business as usual. Mrs. Hawthorne, he called out when she entered. Heard about the trouble last night. You holding up all right? As well as can be expected, Clara replied, loud enough for anyone outside to hear. I brought something to show you. Some papers I found among Henry's things. She made a show of fumbling with the burlap sack, letting it slip slightly in her hands. Through the cracked window, She could see Briggs and two of his friends loitering outside the saloon across the street. They were watching her intently. Perfect. These look like mining documents, she said to Peterson, pulling one of the fake papers partway out of the sack. Something about Henry's claim being, oh dear. She let the paper slip back into the sack and clutched it to her chest dramatically. I don't think I want to know what these say. Some things are better left buried with the dead. Peterson played his part perfectly. Mrs. Hawthorne, in 1867 Nevada, a desperate widow clutches a mysterious burlap sack, her last hope for survival, while a frightened boy begs her with tears in his eyes never to look inside. When she finally opens it, despite his terrified pleas, what she discovers will either save them both or destroy everything they have left. But which will it be? Clara Hawthorne's bare feet hit the cold wooden floor with a thud that echoed through her empty cabin like a gunshot. The sun wasn't even up yet, but sleep had left her hours ago. Outside her window, the Nevada mountains stood like giant sleeping bears against the dark sky. Her stomach growled loud enough to wake the dead. 3 days, 3 whole days, since she'd eaten anything more than stale bread crusts. Her husband Henry was buried in the ground, and her money had gone with him. She pulled on her black dress, the only good one she owned. The fabric felt rough against her skin, scratchy, like the desert wind that never stopped blowing through Millfield. Her hands shook as she buttoned it up, not from the cold, from fear. The mirror on her dresser showed a woman she barely knew, dark circles under her eyes, cheeks sunken in like a dried-up creek bed. Hair that used to shine now hung limp and dull. She looked like a ghost, but ghosts didn't need to eat. Ghosts didn't worry about paying rent. Ghosts didn't have to swallow their pride and beg for help. Clara walked to the kitchen table where a burlap sack sat waiting. Inside was the only thing of value she had left, her grandmother's silver locket. The old woman had worn it every day until she died. Passed it down to Clara's mother, who wore it until her last breath. Then Clara wore it on her wedding day, promising Henry she'd never take it off. She'd broken that promise yesterday. The locket felt heavy through the rough fabric, heavier than silver should feel. It carried the weight of 3 generations of women who'd survived when survival seemed impossible. Clara picked up the sack and held it against her chest. The metal was cold, even through Henry's old shirt that she'd wrapped around it. His shirt still smelled like him, tobacco and soap, and the cedar shavings he used to keep moths away. I'm sorry, Henry, she whispered to the empty room. I'm so sorry. The walk to town took 20 minutes, but it felt like 20 hours. Every step brought her closer to Peterson's general store. Every step brought her closer to admitting she was beaten. Millfield was waking up around her. Smoke rose from chimneys like gray ribbons. The sound of axes chopping wood echoed from the forest. Men headed to the mines with lunch pails and tired eyes. Women swept porches and hung laundry. Normal people doing normal things. People who weren't about to sell the last piece of their family's history just to buy bread. Clara kept her head down and walked faster. She didn't want to see the looks, the whispers, the way people stepped aside when they saw her coming. Being poor was bad enough. Being a poor widow was worse. The general store sat on Main Street like a wooden fortress. Big windows showed shelves packed with things Clara couldn't afford. Flour and sugar and coffee. Warm coats and sturdy boots. Medicine that might have saved Henry if they'd had money for it. Peterson was already behind the counter when she pushed through the door. The bell above rang out cheerful and bright, but the storekeeper's face was anything but cheerful when he saw her, Mrs. Hawthorne. His voice was flat as day-old beer. Morning. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Clara's voice came out smaller than she wanted. She cleared her throat and tried again. I was hoping we could discuss my account. Peterson's eyes narrowed. He was a big man with hands like ham hocks and a belly that strained his vest buttons. His mustache twitched when he was annoyed. It was twitching now. Your account. He said it like the words tasted bad. Let me see here. He pulled out a thick ledger book and flipped through pages with dramatic slowness. Clara knew he already knew exactly how much she owed. $12.37. Might as well have been 1,000. 1237, Peterson announced, like he was reading her death sentence. Plus interest. Call it 15 even. $15. Clara's heart sank to her boots. She'd hoped the locket might be worth 10, maybe 12 if she was lucky. I have something to trade, she said, holding up the burlap sack. Her hands were shaking again. Peterson's eyebrows went up. What kind of something? Before Clara could answer, a small voice piped up from behind a barrel of flour. Don't look under the sack. Clara spun around. A boy sat crouched in the shadows, arms wrapped around his knees. He couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. His clothes were patched and repatched, but clean. Someone cared enough to wash them. His dark hair had been combed, though it stuck up in places like he'd been running his fingers through it. What did you say? Clara asked. The boy's eyes were huge in his pale face. Don't look under the sack, ma'am. Please, don't look, Peterson snorted. That's just Billy McReynolds. Boy's been touched in the head since his daddy got sick. Talks nonsense all day long. But Clara saw something in Billy's eyes that wasn't nonsense. It was fear. Real, honest fear that made her stomach twist. Why shouldn't I look? She asked, kneeling down beside him. Billy glanced around like he was checking for spies. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Bad things happen when people look. My daddy had a sack too. Told Mama never to look inside. But she did. And then his voice broke. Tears started rolling down his dirty cheeks. Then what, Billy? Then everything went wrong. Men came and took our house.